English is no longer just a language, it's a passport, a power tool, a status symbol. From corporate boardrooms to TikTok trends, English has become the unofficial language of the world. But what happens when one language rises above the rest? Let's explore the economic, cultural, and social impacts of English becoming the global tongue. The power and price of linguistic capital. In the modern global economy, English is more than a means of communication. It is linguistic capital, an asset that shapes access to opportunity, mobility, and influence. Introduced by sociologist Pierre Bourdieu, linguistic capital refers to how certain language skills, like English, are valued in the social and economic marketplace. Today, English fluency is a gatekeeper. It grants access to elite universities, global job markets, and high-paying industries like tech, finance, and science. In countries like India and South Korea, being fluent in English often determines who ascends in society. But here's the catch. Access to English education is not equal. Wealthier families can afford private schools, overseas study, or personal tutors. Meanwhile, rural or low-income students often rely on underfunded public schools with inconsistent language instruction. This creates a linguistic elite, where English fluency becomes not just a skill, but a symbol of class. And that's where inequality deepens. English, rather than leveling the playing field, begins to reproduce economic stratification. Over time, these divides become systemic. A child's chances of social mobility are no longer based on talent alone, but on whether they were born into an English-speaking environment. On a national scale, this dynamic affects global competitiveness. Countries that prioritize English fluency often attract more foreign investment and integration into international markets. But those without broad access to English risk being sidelined, even when they have the skills and innovation to compete. So, while English unlocks opportunity for many, it also creates invisible walls that divide people by class, geography, and access. Language is culture. It carries memory, meaning, and identity. Language is culture. It carries memory, meaning, and identity. As English spreads globally, so does the culture embedded within it, particularly American and British norms. Western media dominates screens worldwide. Movies, memes, music, all delivered in English, shape how people think, dress, and express themselves. But this comes at a cost. As English becomes dominant, local languages and cultures shrink. In many regions, younger generations are replacing traditional stories and dialects with English to stay competitive. Over time, this leads to language shift, and eventually, language loss. UNESCO estimates that one language disappears every 2 weeks. With each one, we lose unique knowledge systems, oral traditions, and ways of seeing the world. And yet, English also enables cultural exchange. A playwright in Seoul can collaborate with an activist in Nairobi. A dancer in Rio can share work with fans in Berlin. English can bridge borders, but we must be mindful of what's left behind in the crossing. Social impact. English is increasingly a social filter. It's not just about what you say, it's what your accent, fluency, or vocabulary signal to others. In many societies, English proficiency is associated with intelligence, professionalism, and modernity. That creates pressure. People may hide their native accents, suppress their local languages, or reshape their identities to fit an English-speaking world. This fuels a sense of cultural displacement, where people feel alienated from their own linguistic roots. In education, the effects are stark. Students may focus so intensely on English that their native language skills weaken. And globally, a digital divide grows, because over half of all internet content is in English. If you don't speak it, you're not just disconnected socially, you're locked out of information. So while English may bring the world closer, it can also widen the gap between those who are fluent and those who are not. So, what's the verdict? English has become the operating system of the global world. It powers trade, innovation, collaboration, and cultural fusion. But it also reflects deeper power dynamics. Who gets to speak, who gets heard, and who gets left behind. The challenge isn't stopping English, it's ensuring that as it spreads, it doesn't silence other voices. A truly global world isn't built on one dominant language. It's built on mutual respect, access, and linguistic equity. Because when every language has a place, every person has a voice.